On today's episode of the DeRaud-Messinger Show, we preview and predict number 20 Texas at number 11 Oklahoma State. Longhorns fans, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It's greatly appreciated. So to begin, Dylan, as always, we have some basic game info for everybody. The game is Saturday, 10/22 at 2:30 p.m. Central Time, of course, at Boone Pickens Stadium in Stillwater, Oklahoma. The game will be televised on ABC. And last I checked, Dylan, the line has moved quite a bit. But last I checked, the Longhorns were favored by 6.5 points. So, Dylan, how are you feeling about Oklahoma State? What's your scouting report?
Well, Devon, as a surprise to no one, Spencer Sanders is the man for Oklahoma State. Seemingly been there for a long time now. I know we talk about fifth COVID years and whatnot.
He's the Perry
This
Ellis of college football.
Yeah, probably 10th year. I mean, just a real veteran. He leads the Big 12 in total yards, Devin, but he is, most important part, banged up in his non-throwing shoulder. So we'll have to monitor that. I'm assuming he's going to play. You got to practice like he's going to play. All signs indicate that he's going to play. So safe to assume Sanders will be out there being himself. But he can be inconsistent. He can look really good. He can look pretty bad on some off days. But his best traits is his ability to scramble. If he can get outside of the pocket, improv plays, kind of just make things happen with his feet, that's when he's the scariest. And then also, he can sling the ball. He is not afraid to just let his receivers make a play. And speaking of those receivers, Devin, Xavier Hutchinson for Iowa State, which I know Texas fans have been thinking about him a little bit after last game. Great player. This is a different team in the sense of there's four guys that you have to account for rather than just the one guy and then hoping all the other guys get involved. To start off, they got wide receiver Brennan Presley. He leads the team in catches. He's the slot guy for the team, usually utilized in those quick throw areas. And they got Braden Johnson. He's the deep threat and stands at 6 feet tall. He leads the team in reception yards. This is the guy you got to worry about when Sanders does think about slinging that ball. Then you got John Paul Richardson, Devin, who probably pastors on Sundays as well after the games, given that name. But he's another slot guy on that team.
Part-time
That
job.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, part-time job, no big deal. And then Bryson Green, the fourth guy on the team, he's mostly utilized in that intermediate routes. He could be in line for a pretty good game, Devin. Iowa State was attacking the middle of the field on those passing downs against Texas. Texas was pretty much leaving them open for that. A lot of drive extending was in that middle of the field. So look for him to be mostly more utilized than he usually is. And then offensive line, Devin, protecting Sanders is going to have a big day ahead of them. They are really good in pass protection. They've struggled in the run game. I believe they have a guard that's banged up, Devin, right guard. So that's something to look out for. But other than that, that's kind of what you're looking at with this offense is their passing ability. And then on defense, that strength is up in the trenches on the edges with Brock Martin, who has 3 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and defensive end Tyler Lacey with 8.5 tackles for loss. This is an underachieving group. Then this is not the same defense that it was last year. They are missing key players like Malcolm Rodriguez to the NFL draft. So a lot of that star power isn't there right now. Still waiting for someone to truly step up in these situations. And again, they did also lose defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, which is a huge loss to Ohio State, Devin, that they are still trying to recover from. But again, this is still a talented team that Texas is going to have a lot of work cut out for them.
Definitely, and as you said, the Sanders injury is one to watch, but I think at this point it's just a lot of smoke screens, Dylan, which is normal. It's college football, you know. The quarterback is always more injured than you say he is, or the opposite. I mean, Gundy didn't say a lot in this one, so less injured in this case. But Sanders, yes, he's the guy for Oklahoma State, of course, Dylan. You talked about him. I think it would be a waste of time to tell everybody about Sanders. But at running back, Dylan, you got the junior and Dominic Richardson, who leads the team with 427 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. The thing to watch, though, Dylan, is that Texas Longhorns defense seems to struggle when they got quarterbacks that are able to move out of the pocket and stretch the defense with their legs. Sanders can do that. Will he be able to do that or allowed to do that just given the injury to his shoulder? I still think Sanders will, Dylan. I mean, he's still got his legs. The shoulder, yeah, banged up. But, I mean, you get him outside the pocket versus quarterback sneaks. I don't think Gundy's going to hide him there. But that's the thing to watch for this Texas defense is that combination between Richardson and Sanders, I think, in the running game. Of course, Sanders is going to have to be able to pass it efficiently as well. As you mentioned, there's a quattro of receivers, a trio, quattro, Dylan. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of receivers, as you mentioned, for Oklahoma State. You got leading receiver Braden Johnson. However, when you look at the stats, they're all pretty evenly matched in terms of just receiving yards and stats in general. As you said, Brennan Presley, Bryson Green. You got John Paul Richardson, the pastor apparently, Dylan. Yes, they do their thing on the outside. Another thing to note though is that none of their receivers technically have a wealth of size, to put it that way. Xavier Hutchinson, I believe, is 6'3". Most of these Oklahoma State receivers are about 6 foot, so size-wise, not too much of a disadvantage for Longhorns. However, another thing to mention is that Longhorns cornerback Ryan Watts was injured in last weekend's game against Iowa State. Coach Sark said he was healthy on Monday, so I assume he was practicing this entire week for Texas. However, they are still a little bit banged up at that position. Last weekend against Iowa State, they had to play some freshmen, which, I mean, Dylan, freshmen at Texas are still talented. However, with a lack of experience at the cornerback position, it's kind of tough to be thrown into the environment. And then if they are in this Oklahoma State game, play against four guys that are pretty much seemingly equally talented, it's going to be a tough matchup for Texas in that secondary. Just something to watch. And then as Dylan mentioned, on defense, the thing that I noted was that four guys on that defensive line for the Cowboys have 3 sacks each. You got Tyler Lacey, Brock Martin, Colin Oliver, and mispronouncing possibly here, Ben Kopensky. Just got to commit to it, Dylan. It always sounds right. That group, yeah, exactly. That group is a talented unit. The defensive numbers for Oklahoma State aren't incredibly sexy, Dylan. Oklahoma State, according to the NCAA football website, is 110th in defense in terms of just yards allowed, while Texas is 37th, which surprised a lot of Longhorns fans, I'm sure, because, Dylan, we still hear about it quite a bit, about how coordinators need to be fired. You got to give it time, Dylan. You got to give it time, chemistry. But in addition to defense, Dylan, I'm going to do something that you like to do, but I'm surprised you didn't do it here. I'm going to mention a special teams stat. The Oklahoma State senior kicker Tanner Brown has connected on 12 of 12 field goals. Not necessarily a huge sample size, but, he hasn't missed yet. So, I mean, something to watch out for Longhorns if they're in a field goal range. He seems to be automatic. But, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think this is a pretty well-matched game. Of course, this game could have Big 12 title implications down the road, so it's going to be interesting. People are going to put their heart on the line, and in Sanders' case, maybe his shoulder as well. Now, Dylan, what do you feel about your X factors here?
I mean, the biggest X factor is that shoulder for Sanders. Is he's gonna be able to play through it? Like obviously he's gonna be able to start, but once you start taking a beating, are you gonna be able to get up from that? Is that gonna affect his play? He did get banged up, or he was banged up going into that TCU game, but he seemed like he was pretty fine out there still, racking up points for them against that TCU defense. But the X factors for Texas, Devon, that I'm really looking at, it's mistakes that they made. Ewers didn't have a great game last week, and we say that was his off night, but he still had 3 touchdowns, over 200 yards passing. He still was slinging the ball all over the place. Still looked good. There was just some crucial errors. Plus there's seemingly holding calls on a lot of drive extensions. I know that Keelan Robinson kick return that was brought back, that, the momentum was really swinging Texas's way. And then that, kind of got, Iowa State back into the game. But also that defense, that matchup, that secondary X factor, Devin, that matchup between those receivers for Oklahoma State and that young secondary for Texas, they went right after Ryan Watts' replacement last week with Noel on that slant route that I think went 50 yards to the end zone. So that's something to watch out for. And, we were talking about it. Who's going to get involved? They did try to get Noel and Stanley involved. Iowa State did against Texas. Noel had a few crucial drops, but this receiving core for Oklahoma State is a lot more reliable than Iowa State. So that's something that I'm nervous about, just because of the way that Texas was picked apart. This offense for Oklahoma State is even better. So that's a secondary X factor, Devin, if you enjoyed that.
I love a good secondary X factor. My X factor is also though Spencer Sanders and his injury. As you mentioned earlier, he looked fine against TCU. Of course, I'm sure he's still battling, the shoulder injury though, but not too concerned about whether he's going to play or whether he's not going to play, even though there's been a lack of answers leading up to the game this week. But more importantly than just whether he's going to play is just his performance in general, Dylan. I mean, in games where Spencer Sanders plays good against the Longhorns, Oklahoma State tends to hang in there or win, and if he plays bad, they tend to lose, which, I mean, is not rocket science for the quarterback position. However, I did note that 2020 performance against Texas, he had a great game. However, if Longhorns fans remember, Joseph Osai had the game-winning sack on Sanders and gave Oklahoma State the loss there. That's about the one exception to the Sanders performance and correlation to wins and losses. But like I was talking earlier, is he gonna be allowed to escape the pocket and rush for first downs in this game, or put his body to the line just abuse wise, quite literally? Doing the Texas linebackers Jalen Ford and DeMarvion Overshown have been supplying the hit stick this season. How much is Gundy going to be able to let his quarterback do his thing? We'll see. I think, as you said, I think it's free reign for him here, but we'll see. Now, what are you giving this game in terms of a danger level?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably getting ahead of myself right now. I've got it danger level 6, Devin, but I mean, I feel like a lot of times we're forgetting that Oklahoma State is ranked number 11 for a reason. They played very well against TCU, but just later down the road, that TCU offense wore down that Oklahoma State defense, and Sanders' body kind of just started to break down a little bit throughout the game, nursing that injury. And that allowed TCU to come back, and that explosive offense led by Max Duggan and that receiving core. We're going to find out how Texas's offense compares to TCU, because that is ultimately, so it seems like, the litmus test when you're looking at the Big 12 right now. TCU has looked arguably the best team at the moment, especially with that win last week. So I'm curious to see how, Ewers stacks up against Oklahoma State. But that defense, they're susceptible to the deep plays. Bijan Robinson is probably going to have a large workload ahead of him. So and Roschon Johnson changing up that pace when he comes in just to run over a guy a lot of times when Bijan needs a little bit of a rest. So I just feel like, based off last week, Texas is in a really good spot, especially with those playmakers on offense. We're seeing just how good Xavier Worthy is, Jatavian Sanders, Jordan Whittington, your boy, just seemingly open on every route and just been a really reliable safety valve for Ewers when he needs a guy open. So just for that reason, especially with Sanders banged up, I'm giving it a 6. When normally, if Sanders wasn't dealing with an injury and this defense was, performing at a better rate than they are, I would be leaning more towards Oklahoma State kind of just having the advantage here.
I'm giving it an 8 because, as I mentioned earlier, just future Big 12 title implications. I mean, of course, there's still many games to play, but this game is kind of a decider, low-key, in terms of who will end up getting there if they can continue on that trajectory. Of course, Oklahoma State lost Dylan last weekend in a tough game to TCU, but yet again, like I just said, there's still a lot of football left to be played for all the teams in the Big 12. But I'm giving it an 8 just because Oklahoma State, Dylan, tends to play Texas close. I mean, it seems like anybody tends to play Texas close depending on the weekend. I gave it a 6 last weekend against Iowa State, and Dylan, they definitely kept it close for most of that game. But 8 with Sanders. I think Sanders is going to be fine to keep Oklahoma State in this ball game. However, Texas is going to have to avoid some of the silly mistakes, Dylan, as you mentioned throughout this video. I mean, Ewers, yet again, everyone talks about, I don't feel like people are talking it up as a bad performance necessarily, but it was kind of,
It's just that back pass where he threw it backwards onto
oh
the
no,
ground.
I was
I think
about.
that's what blows it out of proportion, but no, he didn't play that bad. No.
No, I agree, but you were talking about the perception. Yeah, I think the perception around it is like, oh, like he didn't play that great, but still stats wise, he did decent. Not a ton of passing yards, but of course, passing touchdowns are really the key there with 3. But then, yeah, for Texas, you got to avoid the silly mistakes there. Ewers threw a backward pass as a basically throwaway into the dirt, but it was, backwards. So that was the mistake that thankfully for them, took advantage of in terms of recovering that ball, Dylan, and not letting Iowa State get it where it was. But you're gonna have to avoid silly mistakes like that. Bijan and Roshan last weekend had a big game. As you said, Jordan Whittington. When anytime you celebrate with Bevo, it's a guaranteed victory. So Texas, let's take advantage of that. For your own good. But no Bevo, of course, at Oklahoma State. Dylan, predictions. What are you feeling here?
It does depend on Sanders' health. I'm going with he's going to look pretty fine out there. He's a tough dude. He's a warrior out there. But I'm going to be going 41-38 Texas on the road. Just those playmakers that I talked about him earlier. Jatavian Sanders, just such a good tight end. He's already going for school history with how many touchdowns has he got right now? 5?
I believe
He's
5, but he's already up there.
Top 3 at this moment. So, and he's a freshman or a sophomore. Like, this is his second year here, at least starting. So, and just like I said, Xavier Worthy, the ability to just get open, that whip route, Devon, in that end zone to win that game.
That was dirty.
Spicy move. I see Justin Jefferson doing it all the time. I'm not saying he's Justin Jefferson, but just like that ability, that shiftiness is just it's just next level, especially when you have it for a receiver. Whittington always open. You need a possession receiver like that on your team, and then the best running back or top 2 running back in the nation, Devon, in Bijan Robinson. It's so difficult to stop, and everything's kind of seemingly clicking. Ewers had a couple overthrows. There was that one to Casey Kane where we threw it to the outside of the boundary when I think Kane was looking on the inside, and then that crucial drop later in the game. But still, like, if that's his off day, Texas is in a really good spot, especially when you're a young quarterback and you have that running game to rely on. So I feel like this offense for Texas, there's too much underachieving defense for Oklahoma State. All these kind of signs point to a shootout, but Texas seemingly, being able to move the ball and just, the best strategy in the game, Devin, is to get more points than the opponent. And this offense for Texas just seems like it's going to get more points.
100% of the games you score more points still and you win. I mean, that's just football,
That's
But
facts.
I also have Texas winning this one. I thought you were going with the same score with me. You didn't, but I was, my ears perked up a little bit there. I got Texas winning 41-34. Now, of course, we talked about Oklahoma State scouting and everything earlier in this video, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Texas points here. As you said, Bijan Robinson, I don't know where he stands in college football rankings for running backs still on, but yeah, if he's not top 2, top 3, I'd be pretty surprised. Honestly, he leads the country in, missed tackles? What's the stat called? I mean, he's breaking all these tackles left and right. Roshan Johnson, even, the RB2 for Texas, is really that heart and motor of the team, and he could probably be starting for most of the programs in this country. But I did like the points you mentioned, Dylan, about Jatavian Sanders specifically, quite honestly. Worthy's going to be a factor too, and Whittington. But I think Sanders against linebackers is going to be an interesting matchup. I mean, we covered that matchup in high school, and of course it's high school football versus college football, Dylan, so a big discrepancy there. But I mean, in high school, when you lined them out wide against a linebacker, things typically did not end up in the other team's favor. But also Whittington is going to probably be lined up against some linebackers when he's lined up in the slot. And he's just, doing a man-on-man coverage beater. I mean, he scored his first touchdown of the season last weekend against Iowa State, which was kind of shocking if you've been watching Longhorns or games. Seems like he's been, racking up receiving yards, but he finally got on the board. Quinn Ewers, of course, Dylan, he's going to have to play better in this week's game against, a top Oklahoma State team, 11th ranked in the country. But then, yet again, offense, Dylan. Why do we always gravitate there? We got defense to worry about for Texas. They are top 40 defense, which, if I was telling myself that I'd be saying this earlier in the season, I think I'd be shocked that they are as good, quote unquote, as they've been so far this season. And that defensive front is going to have to plug up the running lanes and keep Sanders from escaping the pocket. And I think that's really the key in this one. As I said, Texas has struggled against the running quarterbacks. Can they keep Sanders within the lane? Dylan,
that's the thing. That's
go
the
ahead, take it.
Sanders really carries that offense in a certain way with what he does. And that running game with Dominic Richardson, it's not been great. I believe he's averaging around 4 yards per carry, which is bottom half of the Big 12. This offensive line has struggled getting a push up front. And Richardson, we talk about Bijan making you miss. He hasn't shown the ability to really make guys miss. He's a power runner. He goes right through you if he can. And I think this is a situation where Texas can really key up on that. And it all just comes down to Sanders at that point. The running game just kind of comes from his legs. And then maybe Richardson can pull one together later in the game when the defensive line for Texas is a little worn out. But I think that's something that Texas can really take away, force Sanders to really beat you with his arm and just see what happens, because he's shown the willingness to just throw it in double coverage. Like if he sees Braden Johnson down the field and it's double coverage, he's not afraid to take that shot, and that's where Texas can really, take the ball away and take advantage of that aggressiveness of Sanders.
Exactly. And Dylan, not even, receiving or quarterback-wise, it's in Stillwater. The game is in Stillwater, and Stillwater is always a tough environment. We both have Texas in this one, but more importantly, who do you guys have winning this Oklahoma State-Texas game? Let us know down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, have a great rest of your day.